Today we are going to discuss about vSphere availability architecture. Then we will know how our HA will be function. So in this lesson we are going to describe the heartbeat mechanism used by our vSphere HA, identify and discuss other failures scenarios when you implemented HA environment, recognize vSphere HA. Recognize vSphere HA design considerations. So these three topics we are going to discuss in this lesson. So coming to the architecture, by default HA should be enabled on 2-node cluster. Whenever you deploy a ESXi cluster, minimum requirement is you need 2 ESXi hosts. Okay, so we need to talk about few components during this. So HA deployment requirements we can discuss in next slides. Let's see how our HA architecture is. Okay, so HA having a agent called fault domain manager. This is called FDM. Okay, so this FDM was introduced from your vSphere 5.5 onwards. In earlier versions, you were having AM agent instead of faulty domain manager, and that architecture is different. That version HA architecture is different compared to your vSphere 5.5 HA architecture, 5.5 and 6.x versions. Okay, so what this faulty domain manager will do is whenever you enable the HA on your environment, by default this faulty domain manager agent will be deployed on your ESXi host end. If you see here in this diagram, whatever ESXi hosts are there, those ESXi hosts are enabled with the HA and it is installed with the faulty domain manager agent. Okay, let's talk about other components, VPXD and hostd. These are the three components participate major role in your vSphere HA architecture. From vCenter to ESXi host communication, your faulty domain hostd and VPXA agents will be help, and to communicate or to function your HA future, faulty domain manager will play key role on your HA architecture. Okay, so if you take prior version of vSphere HA architecture components, that is 5.0 or 5.1 or earlier version, you have AAM agent and VMAP plugin and host vCenter to ESX communication. These two are mandatory domain agents. So VPXD runs on your vCenter server. So this agent will helps to communicate ESXi host by your vCenter server. Okay, So this VPXD daemon will be installed as service on your ESXi host, that is VPXA agent, and VPXA will talk to your host D daemon. Host D will be installed on your ESXi host by default. Whenever you deploy on ESXi host, host D daemon will be installed. Daemon is nothing but service. In Windows, we'll call it as services. In Linux, we will call it as daemons. Okay, so the host D daemon by default installed during your ESXi deployment, and VPXD will be pushed the VPXA agent whenever your ESXi host added into your vCenter server. Okay, so instead of FDM in earlier versions, you are having AAM agent and VMAP plugin. What this VMAP plugin will do is, whatever communication is happening between these two VPXD and host D servers, agents communication, your AAM and VMAP plugin will be communicate. I will repeat once again. So the VPXD file will be installed on your vCenter server, and whenever your ESXi host is added into your vCenter server, it will deploy a agent, that is VPXA agent. Okay, so whenever a by default host D will be installed on your ESXi host during your ESXi hypervisor deployment. Okay, and whenever you enable the HA from this option, turn on vSphere HA on this cluster, by default it will push agent, that is faulty domain manager. We will call it as FDMs. How these three communicate will explain. Okay. So once you enable the HA and FDM is installed on your all ESXi host, so your VPXD will talk to VPXA on your ESXi host. Your VPXA will talk to your host D daemon. Whenever you deployed already faulty domain manager or HA enabled on your ESXi host, your FDM will start talking to your host D. Okay, and what it says is, every time faulty domain manager verifies your host is online or not. It means it is running or not, it will validate it. Okay, are you guys are able to follow me? Okay then. Okay, fine. So this total part is faulty domain manager, VPXA, host D, all are resident on your ESXi host, and these three agents will communicate. It's every 11 seconds it communicates to your vCenter server. This FDM agent will communicate to your vCenter server using the host D daemon and VPXA agents. It tells your ESXi host status. Is this server is running or not? Whatever state it is. Okay. Maybe it might be failure due to hardware or software failures. After 11th second, it will tells to your ESXi host. This particular host was isolated from some reason. Then whatever virtual missions are there on this ESXi host, based on your virtual mission options in HA configurations, those will be powered on or powered off or leave powered on state shutdown state on another node in the same vSphere HA cluster. It will not migrate. Remember this. It will only power on, shutdown, or power off VMs which are resident on defected or failure ESXi host. Okay. So let's see how it functions. Okay. So your vCenter server, all ESXi hosts which are part of your HA cluster, all will be deployed FDM agent using your HA daemon, and it communicates each other. Then it will identify which is master, which is slave. So master node, we will call it as whatever fault domain manager is installed, and it is managing to other 61 nodes in our ESXi cluster. So it contains all the FDM or HA database, and it will monitor the slave host in our ESXi clusters. Okay, it keep on identify other 61 nodes status, which host is online, which host is isolated. This information will be validated by your master node in your HA cluster. Okay, so in earlier, are you guys clear on this? Okay, and the whole process, your HA contains a database that is started with fdm.fdm that will be stored on your data stores. If you already enabled a data store, you can able to see that. By default, this folder will be created whenever you enabled a HA. Okay, this folder will be created. This folder contains FDM agent information, and it contains your host D information, your ESXi host information. Okay. So here your database will be stored, as well as the same data store will be stored on your ESXi host also. Okay. In whole scenario, if you wanted to check your ESXi host HA role, it is master or slave, that information also you can able to see it here. If you see here, you can able to see your host 2 is a slave for this HA cluster B. We'll see host weight. This should be obviously master because we are only having 2 nodes, right? So this master node will closely monitors whatever ESXi nodes are there in this cluster, under this cluster B, and it will communicate to your slave nodes, and it will identify the status of your ESXi host. Whenever there is a isolation happened, immediately it will update to your FDM manager. FDM manager is located on your master slave, and whatever virtual missions are there, this host 2, those missions will be migrated to your failover node or whatever HA failover node is configured on your vSphere HA cluster features. Here we can specify the ESX failover node. So that failover node will be take care of the load whenever there is a event is happened on your ESXi HA enabled cluster. Okay. So when you add this failover node, on top of this failover node, whatever virtual machines are resident on your host 2, those will be migrated to, those will be powered on, power off, or shut down state. The machines will be registered on your host 5 or failover node. Okay, is that clear to everyone? Okay, so in 5.0 and 5.1 or earlier versions, your HA functionality is different. Same functionality it is, but it is using different agent. Instead of FDM in vSphere 5.0 and 1, it uses AAM, and in vSphere 6, your FDM can talk to your host D and host D can talk to VPX agent. Whereas coming to the 5.0 and 5.1, your instead of FDM, assume this is AAM agent, and it will not directly talk to your host D. It's required a mediator or translator, that is VMAP plugin. Because your AAM language can't understand your host D file. That is the reason in HA 5.0 and 5.1 architecture, they used a translator plugin, that is VMAP plugin, that can understand. VMAP plugin can understand your host D and AAM agent instructions, and it passes and it communicate information between these two. Okay, but 6 VMAP plugin was removed, and it is AAM is renamed as FDM. Your FDM agent can talk to host D can talk to your VPX agent, and your VPX can talk to your VPXD, which is resident on vCenter server. So that your vCenter server will know that these hosts are HA enabled hosts are online, and the maximum isolation response of your ESXi host is by default 11 seconds. After 11 seconds, whenever your ESXi host is down due to some hardware or software issue, then after 11 seconds your vCenter server knows that this particular ESXi host was isolated from your HA cluster. Okay, any doubts on this particular slide? Okay, I'm moving to the next slide. So in this slide we are going to talk about your network heartbeat. So the master host sends a periodic heartbeat to the slave host, so that the slave host knows that master host is alive. Okay, so slave host will be sent to the heartbeats using your ESXi management network, and at the same time your master host also sends the heartbeats to your slave host. So in this architecture, if master host is down, your slave host can become as a master host, because your vSphere HA database is located on shared storage, and all ESXi hosts can be accessible that particular vSphere HA database. But whenever a host is taken a role as master, that particular master host will have read and write permissions on your vSphere HA database, and whatever slave hosts are there, those slave hosts will be access that database in read-only mode. Is that clear? Any questions? Okay. Fine. The next one is data store heartbeats. So in earlier versions 5.0 and 5.1, you are not having data store heartbeats feature on your vSphere HA architecture. Okay, but 6.0, 5.5 onwards, you are having data store heartbeats availability on your HA architecture. Based on data store heartbeats availability, your HA will be function. So let's read this. Data stores are used as a backup communication channel to detect virtual machine and host heartbeats. So under your ESXi host data store heartbeating options, you can able to see the following three options. That is, automatically select data stores accessible from the host. It means your slave and master host on your HA cluster will access automatically whatever selected data stores by your nodes. Use data stores only from the specified list. So we need to specify the data stores where your vSphere HA database should be created. That you have to specify it. Last one is use data source from the specified list and complement automatically if needed. So you can able to use this option. Specifically, you want to specify a data store from your storage DRS or whatever shared data stores on your HA environment. Okay. So coming back to this concept, earlier why there is no data stores functionality or data store heart beating functionality is not there. Why? Because your database, HA database is stored on data stores. Some reason your data store was disconnected. So your HA will not function. By that time, if there is any host is down on your environment, so your vCenter server don't know, the isolation process won't work, and your vCenter server don't know which host is down. It thinks that all the hosts are online, but okay. So that is the reason in 5.5 they mandate data store heartbeats, and all the data stores whatever are there in your environment which is connected to your vSphere HA data store, by default as per your designs we need to choose automatically selected data stores accessible from the host. If you select that, the database will be located on your shared data stores, all shared data stores. In this model, any of the data store is down. The second data store will contain that database, and your data stores vSphere HA database will be function as normal. Okay, this is nothing but your DC and ADC functionality on your Windows domain controller domain environment. If DC is not available, so your ADC will function as a DC. Like that, here also your vSphere HA database will be stored on all your data stores. Whenever there is a heartbeat miss from one data store, you can able to your HA nodes can able to access the vSphere HA database from other data store in the vSphere HA shared data stores environment. Any doubts? Okay. So additional vSphere HA failure scenarios are so slave host failure, master host failure, host isolation, virtual machine storage failure. So your virtual machine component protection, all paths are down, whatever data stores are connected to your virtual machine or provisioned virtual machine data store, all paths are down, or permanent device loss. Means it's lost the physical connectivity of storage, HBA or RDM, permanently lost the connectivity. And the network failures and isolations. Let's talk about slave host failure. So it might be down with the hardware failure or software failure. If there is any hardware failure, you will receive a purple screen of death on your ESXi host screen, and after 11 seconds your vCenter will be identify that it will isolate and it will identify that the slave host is failed. Then it starts functioning. Your HA rules will comes into the picture and it start migrating, it start powering on, shutdown or power off. Options will be choose as per your HA design and it will power on or shut down whatever condition is there VM, that state will be appeared on your failover node on your ESXi HA cluster. Like that, if your master host is failed, so any one of the slave will be become as master host and it will act as a slave will act as a master host as your vSphere HA database is centralizedly located and any of the slave will be access your HA database and it becomes as a master host. Okay, and the master host failure scenarios, it might be hardware, software problem or your network card physical connectivity disconnection. I forgot to tell you about slave host failure. So whatever failure is happened, software or your hypervisor failed due to hardware or software issues or physical network isolations. Okay, it might be problem with your Cat5 cable or your network interface card was not installed with the proper drivers and it was not able to transfer your HA heartbeat traffic. Then also after 11 seconds your vCenter server will be think that your host is failed. Okay, so these are the slave and the host failure scenarios. Okay, the major issues might be problem with your ESXi host, hardware or software issues, or physical network disconnections. Due to this, your host will be isolated from your HA network, heartbeat network, and your vCenter will think that your HA agent, HA slave or master was failed. Okay, this is about host isolations and slave master host failures scenarios, and coming to the virtual machine storage failures. So for this, you need to enable specifically on your HA feature, that is VM monitoring. You have to enable this option. If you are not enable this option on your HA, your virtual machines monitoring will be stopped, and at the same time the virtual machine component protection, whatever feature is there on your vSphere HA, that will not protect your virtual machines. Okay, so in HA you can able to monitor and you can able to verify your virtual machine isolation status also. Coming to the only storage part of your virtual machine. Okay. So network failures and isolations I have already explained in slave master isolation process. If your network interface card is down on your host or virtual machines network path is down and it is connected storage for your virtual machine, and it thinks that your HA agent FDM thinks that the storage heartbeat got not receiving from this particular virtual machine due to all paths down or permanent device loss of your shared storage for this particular virtual machine. Okay, then it starts giving isolation response to your vCenter server, and it will show you your virtual machine is isolated from your HA enabled cluster. So these are the scenarios there on your vSphere HA failure scenarios. Okay, so any doubts? Are you guys are able to follow me? So, okay, here in this diagram, we are explaining failed slave host. When a slave host does not respond to the network heartbeat issued by the master host, the master vSphere HA agent tries to identify the cause. Okay, so these are your HA management networks. Okay, so it's try to reach your vCenter servers, trying to reach through HA heartbeat network, and it identifies after 11 seconds. It identifies and it got information in the 12th second saying that your host is failed. Then whatever virtual machines are there, AB, that migrated to your failure host are based on your configuration, failure configuration policy on your vSphere HA cluster. Okay, so if you enable the admission control and control policy as percentage wise on your HA cluster instead of configuring specific failure node. Using this specific failure node, you can able to specify specific ESXi host whenever there is an event happen on your HA cluster. Only those missions need to be power on, whatever state HA state should be, virtual missions need to be power on specific failure node. But there is another option also there. Based on availability resource on your ESXi cluster, you can able to enable resource in percent wise for your failure node instead of failure node. Is that clear? Any questions? So the failure process, if you select a specified host during your host failure event, you can able to specify specific ESXi host by selecting specified ESXi host. And whereas if you select host failures in the cluster tolerates, you can specify the nodes. For example, if you are having 62 nodes and you wanted to specify a specific host to take the load of your failure node virtual machines, you can specify the node here. As well as you can specify the percent as also. So the percentage will take care based on your availability resource on your ESXi HA cluster. So instead of specifying specified failure node, we are specifying choosing the percentage of your cluster resource. Okay, so when you choose like this, so your HA will be function if one node is down on your ESXi HA enabled cluster. So it considers all the resource available on your DRS enabled cluster. Okay. So based on here available total cluster resource, 25% if you specify that 25% of CPU or memory resource for this HA enabled cluster will use for failover node. Instead of specifying a specific host here, using the percentage of cluster resource, we are specifying the CPU and memory resource for your failover node. Are you guys are able to follow me? Okay, instead of failover node, we are specifying a percentage. So that that percentage might be available from your ESXi enabled cluster node might be 61 or 60, whatever number free resource is available. That resource will be consumed by your reserved percentage HF failover cluster resource. Here you can customize it. You can mention 10% or you can mention 15 based on your infrastructure design and load. You have to specify that. By default, it enables 25%. Okay. So in this failure slave host mechanism or failure slave host scenario, your based on your HA failure node. Yes, exactly. Total free resource of your HA enabled cluster, not on specific ESXi host. Okay, because we have here only 2 nodes, right? So maximum you can able to configure 64 nodes for your cluster, and you can enable HADRS function on these 64 nodes. Okay. Any questions on this slide? Okay, so I'm moving to the next slide. When the failed your master host in your HA cluster, when the master host is placed into maintenance mode or crashes, the slave host detects that the master host is no longer issuing heartbeats. Okay, so your host will have a MOID by default that will be generated by your fault domain manager agent. MOID is nothing but your computer ID, UUID, group ID, like that your HA also having MOID. Whenever a node is added into your HA cluster, that will be allocated by your HA agent. Okay, so it knows as the MOIDs only, it knows this particular host is a master agent and particular host is a slave host. Okay, during your master agent or master host failed on your HA enabled cluster, your other host will knows that using this MOID communication failed. If I give 50% and the total memory free is 8 GB, the total available memory is 12 GB. So first of all, while configuring itself, it says error. So whatever available resource is there, that you can able to use it and you can able to configure it. 50 you can able to configure. Why? Because you are having total 2 nodes are there. 50 means how much is the memory is there? So total is 8 GB. So it calculates 4 GB. So in your scenario, if you give 50%, the total memory free is 8 GB and the total is available memory is 12 GB. Okay. What I understand is you are having 12 GB and memory free is 8 GB. So if in this scenario, if a host is failed, only it consider the free space is whatever free space is available. In that 50% will be consumed for your failover resource. Okay, it will not access your total memory because your total memory is already occupied, right? The 4 GB is occupied by some other tasks. So whatever free resource available, that free resource will be accessed by your failover resource in the event of host failure. Okay, fine. So in failed master host scenario, you might be move your host for patching purpose. You might be moved your master host agent into maintenance mode. Then or your hypermaster host is crashes by any software or hardware reason. So the heartbeat will not transfer to your default gateway on your master host node, your slave host, and the slave host whenever not reaches your master host heartbeat, your vCenter server will elect any of this slave host as master host. So This is I already explained in the earlier slide. However, I already explained this slide also here itself. Any questions? Okay. So I'm moving to the next slide. So isolated host, how it will be detected, we'll see. If the host does not observe election traffic on the management and cannot ping its default gateway, the host is isolated. So isolation, how it will detect is, what happened? I am not able to. Okay. So how your isolation will be detected is, so whenever you configure the ESXi host management network for your heartbeat, so by default your HA heartbeat traffic will be transferred to your VM kernel port group, which is configured for your ESXi management network. So this management network will have some gateway. That is 10.0.0.202. So whenever your FDM not reaches this particular gateway, your VPXD agent thinks that your PPXA agent is not available on your HA enabled cluster, and it start thinking after 11 seconds the particular host was isolated. I will explain once again. The functionality will not change either. Whatever switch you use in the virtual environment, the functionality will be not change. It's only a matter of configuration of your ESXi management network. So you mean to say you have configured ESXi management network for your ESXi host, sorry, standard switch and VDS on a single host. So your question is you have configured management network on your virtual standard switch and virtual distributed switch. Am I right? Okay. So that is the reason here you have configuration. While configuring, you have the options. When you choose the VM kernel option, you have specific options. So this is standard switch. Yeah, we have to specifically we have to segregate that configuration. When you are configuring VM kernel, during that time we have to specify. Otherwise, it will be tough to manage. So while selecting, while configuring, While configuring VM kernel port, you have to specify that. Okay, one second. I think we need to add new one. Here you have to specify VM. This particular VM kernel need to. I am just explaining. So here we have to give some label and we have to configure it. So here you have to, while configuring management network, here you have to segregate that. And you have to provide for HA, you have to provide a specific VLAN. If your network or HA infrastructure is major, then you have to specifically configure separate VLAN for your HA network. Then only we can able to identify that. So by seeing your VLAN ID and by segregating your HA kernel port, you can able to identify that, Sridhar.
Hello. Hello, Krishna.
Sridhar, I am able to hear.
నా క్వశ్చన్ ఏంటంటే నేను ఆల్రెడీ మేనేజ్మెంట్ కెర్నల్ పోర్ట్ వీడియోస్ లో యాడ్ చేశాను.
ఓకే.
అండ్ ఆల్రెడీ స్టాండర్డ్ లో కూడా ఉంది.
ఓకే.
ఇప్పుడు హెచ్ఏ ట్రాఫిక్ ఎందులో మూవ్ అవుతుంది? ఎందులో?
సో మీరు జనరిక్ గా కాన్ఫిగర్ చేస్తే కనుక వీ కాంట్ ఐడెంటిఫై దట్.
జనరిక్ అంటే దాంట్లో నాకు ఏం ఆప్షన్ లేదే.
మీన్స్ ఈ డిఫాల్ట్ కాన్ఫిగరేషన్ ఉంది కదా ఇప్పుడు, లైక్ వీఆర్ యూజింగ్ విచ్ సబ్నెట్ ఇట్ ఈస్. సో దట్ ఈస్ 10.0.0. subnet. ఓకే. సో మీరు విఎం కెర్నల్ యాడ్ చేసి ఈ పర్టికులర్ సబ్నెట్ కి యాడ్ చేశారనుకోండి, సో ఈ ట్రావెల్స్ ఇక్కడ ఈఎస్ఎక్స్ఐ మేనేజ్మెంట్ ఏదైతే కాన్ఫిగర్ చేస్తారో దాని నుంచి హెచ్ఏ ట్రాన్స్ఫర్ అవుతుంది బై డిఫాల్ట్, irrespective of standard or VDS switch. ఓకే. బట్ ఇక్కడ మీరు మీ మేనేజ్మెంట్ నెట్వర్క్ అండ్ ఈ హోస్ట్ క్లస్టర్స్ హెచ్ఏ కనుక మీరు మోర్ నోడ్స్ యాడ్ చేసి యూజ్ చేస్తుంటే వీ నీడ్ టు సెగ్రిగేట్ దిస్ నెట్వర్క్ ఫ్రమ్ దిస్ ఎగ్జిస్టింగ్ సబ్నెట్. శ్రీధర్ నాకు ఎక్కువ వస్తుంది.
ఓకే ఓకే
ఓకే ఫైన్. సో మీరు ఎలా సెగ్రిగేట్ చేసుకోగలరు అంటే ఈ నెట్వర్క్ ని మీరు స్పెసిఫిక్ గా VLAN ని కాన్ఫిగర్ చేసుకొని మీ స్విచ్ లో వైల్ కాన్ఫిగరింగ్ VM kernel boot we need to provide that. Otherwise it uses the existing subnet and it travels the heartbeats and the data store heartbeats from the same network, ESXi management network only. Even you can't see that information. Only మీరు అప్పుడు ఈథీరియల్ కనుక వైర్ షార్క్ కానీ ఈథీరియల్ కానీ నెట్వర్క్ మానిటరింగ్ ప్యాకెట్ ట్రాన్స్ఫర్ చూస్తే కానీ అప్పుడు మీకు వేరియేషన్ తెలియదు హెచ్ఏ దేని ద్వారా ట్రాన్స్ఫర్ అవుతుంది అని చెప్పేసి మేనేజ్మెంట్ నెట్వర్క్ లో.
ఓకే.
So is that question you asked? Sorry. So we need to segregate while configuring HA heartbeat network, you have to segregate that. Then only you can able to identify. But your small infrastructures, okay. So we won't we won't segregate the network, and it travels from your default ESXi management network itself. But if you are using use a enterprise level environment, you need to segregate your HA network, as well as you have to specify some specific subnet. Then only you will know that the specific heartbeats are transferring using your specific VM kernel port group. Sridhar, is your query is clear or still it's pending? Okay. In most of organizations, what they will do is they won't create the separate VLAN. In the same subnet, they will do the super subnetting, and they will give like 10.0 some 24 like that they will give you. It means you can able to configure your HA network from your 24 subnet. It allows, I think, only 12 IPs like that. It means last 12 IPs you can able to access from for your HA subnet. By seeing IP address, we should not determine that we are using same subnet. Okay, in that they will, in existing subnet itself, they will configure super subnetting, and they will assign to various VLANs for your HA operations. Okay. Fine. Any doubts on failed master host? Sorry, isolated host I am explaining, I guess. If the host does not observe election traffic on the management network, in the sense your heartbeat network election traffic, in the sense via your management network, it is not pingable via your default gateway on your ESXi host. Your host will be things that isolated. There might be network disconnections, or your physical network cables damaged, or your host is down with hardware or software issues, and your management thinks that your host gateway is isolated from your HA cluster. Any doubts on this slide? So gateway is common for your. So every time it has to, your FDM has to maintain all ESXi hosts IP addresses information. Instead of that, it maintains a centralized IP address. It can reach to your all ESXi hosts. That is the reason where taking under isolation process, we are considering your gateway, because gateway will have a single IP address. All ESXi hosts, you will configure the common IP address, that is gateway. Otherwise, it will conflict in your database if you consider as each individual host IP. because your heartbeat network will be transferred via your management network. That management network contains your common gateway. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'm moving to the next slide. So your HA design considerations based on your infrastructure and available hardware components for HA. Host isolation events can be minimized through good design. Implement redundant heartbeat networks. So for your HA heartbeat network, you have to configure two network interface cards by default for redundant purpose. Otherwise, it will show you an alert on your HA configuration. It shows a warning. Redundant heartbeat network is not available. So VMware is recommending when during this implementation you have to configure redundant heartbeat network as well as redundant isolation address also. So you have to configure redundant isolation address for your HA. Okay. If host isolation events do occur, good design enables vSphere HA to determine whether the isolated host is still alive. Implement data stores so that they are separated from the management network by using one or both the following approaches. So the data stores will be configured to fiber channel over fabric or your NFS, that is IP address. Through IP address it will communicate. So any questions? If you are not consider these design considerations, so if there is any physical, coming to the first point, if there is any physical problem with the network interface card on your vSphere HA host, so the second card will be takes the load and you can minimize that. Host is isolation response, you can able to minimize that. Like that, there are advantages are there if you follow these design considerations on your HA implementations. Okay, even for storage also. So I'm moving to the next slide. So virtual machine storage failures. With an increasing number of virtual machines and data stores on each host, storage connectivity issues have high costs but are infrequent. Connectivity problems due to network or switch failure, array misconfiguration, and power outage. So connectivity problems for your virtual machine storage failures are major are network or switch failure. So your storage is connected via IP based storage. It means your this one network over you have connected to storage to your virtual machines. So if any physical switch or it means if you configured storage through ISKC, So your SKC initiator can use one of the VM kernel port group, and it will function using the VM kernel port group IP address. Okay, this particular subnet, wherever is configured switch, if that switch is down, your storage will be disconnected for your host. Obviously, your virtual machine lose the storage. Okay, so that is the reason we are saying network or switch failure for your storage connectivity. And the second one is array misconfiguration. On the storage end, if array is misconfigured and the paths are not configured properly and it's not presented properly to your ESXi host, and if any of the path is down, your storage will not discover from secondary path. So this configurations has done from your storage end. If they misconfigured, there is no failure on storage end. Only using one path your data store is configured. If path is disconnected from your storage, then your virtual machine will lose the storage. And power outage. So for your storage box or your ESXi host not configured with the redundant power outage, redundant power boxes, so you will see this power outage issues in your environment. But most of the data centers by default they configure data center will be run with your AC in first line. In the second line or redundant line they will configure 2 UPSs. Even if UPS 1 is failed, in power outage scenario the load will be taken care by your UPS 2. Okay, any questions? So in this scenario, virtual machine storage failures, your virtual machine availability is affected. Obviously, if your virtual machines are by default present on your storage, in the above scenario, if the connectivity problems are occur, your virtual machines will be affected, and the hosts are difficult to manage that, as this is physical connectivity issues, which is not managed by your ESXi host. And array misconfiguration also not managed by your ESXi host. And power outage also not managed by your ESXi host. If these options are configured appropriately during your design of your VMware environment, then you can able to provide your redundant switch for your HA network, as well as storage configuration, as well as power configuration. Even in these scenarios also, your HA will function properly, as well as the storage whatever is allocated to your virtual machine, that will be provided in proper manner. Okay, any questions on this slide? Okay. So virtual machine component protection. Coming to the virtual machine component protection. So in this virtual machine components protection against storage failures in virtual machine, only vSphere HCA cluster that contain ESXi6 host can be used and enabled VMCP. So this feature comes along with your vSphere 6.0 HA only. So earlier versions is not there even in vSphere 5.5 also. Okay. So this feature you can able to use. This can be provides this feature you can able to use on your cluster based applications provisioning environment. In the sense, if you are having these two ESX, these two virtual machines are enabled with the cluster services and providing a single application services. During that scenario, your virtual machine component protection failure alerts or failure mechanism will start functioning by using virtual machine component protection. So this feature was introduced from our vSphere 6 onwards. So any questions? So earlier we have HA provides the availability on your ESXi hosts and virtual machines. Now whatever applications are provisioned on your clustered deployed VM environment, those virtual machine also protected by using your HA VMCP feature from vSphere 6.0 onwards. Okay, this feature was having more information in your 6.5, so they enhanced it and they added more flexibility or scalability on vSphere 6.5. Okay, but using vSphere 6, this virtual machine component protection feature will detect application failures on your virtual machines. Okay. So any other questions on this slide? Okay, I'm moving to the next slide. So these are the topics we discussed. So configuring HA. See. Shall I continue configuring HA? Sorry. So in this we are going to discuss about configuring vSphere HA cluster and prerequisite to configure your HA. Okay. And I have prepared another overview of HA cluster. Okay. So once all the slides are completed, I will share this PPT to you guys. So you even go through this and let me know still if you have any doubts. So we'll discuss queries on weekend. Okay, tomorrow I will share this PPT. Okay. Still, even if you have any queries on this PPT or today's class, we can discuss on Saturday or weekend session. Okay. And please use the lab guide and enable configure your HA network and HA implementations. You can do it and do the practice. Use all HA options and enable these admission controls, HA controls, and specify a failure node. And in one scenario, you can place percentage of your resource, failure resource, and you can test that how your virtual machines are behaving when host is failing. Okay. Fine. So, Murli, you have any questions on lab? Murli, Sridhar, Shravan, Harish, do you have any questions in your labs?
నేను రన్ చేశాను సార్ అవి ప్యాచెస్, కానీ అవి ఏం ఒకటి కూడా ఏం తీసుకోలేదు.
Sure, you said update manager is working fine, right? Okay. 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 If you add a new data center also, nothing will be changed because you have registered update manager on your vCenter server, right? Whatever data centers you added, the updated manager will available for all the data centers. It means under data center whatever clusters, any challenges? So here 59 are available. C is unknown. It is already installed 80. Which host having problems either? Host 5, host 2. It's not updating patches.
go.
I'm just cross-checking what are the patches it is taking while remediating.
So is it mandatory maintenance to maintenance mode?
Sure, we'll wait 5-10 minutes and see. Sridhar, hello. I think host is rebooted. Okay, we'll wait for come back. I didn't see any challenges either. Sridhar, I think it is updated with practice. I didn't do anything. I just whatever options are there, I selected there. Okay. First we have to stage, then we have to remediate. Normally what we'll do once host maintains moved into the maintenance mode, we'll directly remediate that. Okay. How about the other one? Can you try on 5 and let me know so that I can check tomorrow if there are any challenges. I don't think we don't have any challenges. However, try on other host. We'll check tomorrow. Okay. Okay, chalo then.
సార్ నా ల్యాబ్ చెక్ చేశారు సార్ వన్స్. హలో హలో